Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another episode of Successful Witches, where we are obsessed with spice, with smut, and happily ever afters are non-fucking negotiable within this landscape. I have a beautiful, beautiful guest joining us on the podcast today, the one, the only, Rory Scott, who has kindly come to join us to talk all about her magical, mystical fantasy world full of gods and swoon-worthy male main characters that are going to definitely leave you weak-kneed. Welcome on in, Rory. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, like you said, it's full of gods. I was a former Percy Jackson nerd turned, fantasy romance freak who eventually was like, you know what? All of these kind of little bits that I have in my head, maybe there's something there. Wrote it down and here we are.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And it is the most delicious world. It is so exciting. And I have been absolutely just in your DMs the whole time while we've been waiting to jump on and record this episode together. So we are going to be in for a very fun time chatting all about things that make up Rory Scott's world. So what I love to kind of get in and find out a little bit about is, how did you begin your indie romance author journey? Because we all have such a unique path, and I find it the most fascinating thing to learn how people get to where they are and how it kind of comes together. So please do indulge us. Spill all the tea.
Of course. So I think it's not a new story by any means. I was a huge fan fiction reader in kind of like in my teens and everything. That never stopped. And I tried my hand in it a couple times. And it was like I would have ideas where, I'd read a book or a fanfic and I'd be like, oh, that's really awesome, but wouldn't it be so cool if it went like this? Or kind of, my own, or I'd take one character story arc and kind of in my own mind run off into a whole different thing. And, 3 daydreams later, it's an entirely different plot line. And I think it kind of just started where at one point, I don't even really remember when it was, but I was just kind of like, I have to try this. I think that I can write something down, and we can get into a little bit later, but I had one idea that I won't share because I'm still not sure if it's one I want to dabble in yet, but kind of had one idea and that didn't really, pan out. I just couldn't really get to like a full book. I had like little parts. Actually, the main characters in that book were still named Dominic and Rose, so that's carried over. But yeah, so it was kind of that. And then in terms of kind of deciding to publish myself and do it kind of like the indie author route, I was just kind of like impatient, for lack of a better word, where, this isn't, my full-time job. If it ended up like that, that'd be great. But I was like, you know what, this is a really awesome hobby. I'd rather have my work out there sooner than kind of wait and see if the traditionally published route worked. If that ever did pan out, that would be awesome. But it was one of those things where I think I was very lucky to have the freedom to just kind of do it. And, Kindle Direct Publishing, it makes it fairly easy. There's still definitely a learning curve. I had to reformat the paperback, I think 15 times before I got it right. But I think I had 2 copies, and according to some of the other people who've gotten it, it's good. But yeah, so I think that was, I would say, patience is the main thing that kind of got me more into like the indie publishing path of it all. But then, yeah, just I think a good old healthy dose of daydreaming for the the story aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thread, right? Is that you have to have the inspiration and the daydreaming, even if it goes nowhere. And I think that's like one of the biggest permission slips, I think, that most authors, sort of either need to give themselves or to hand over to someone else, is that it's okay to have these ideas that for whatever reason kind of sit there in that state of, we're just still getting our heads around them. They might evolve into something else. We just don't know, because these characters in these worlds, they have a mind of their own. Like
100%. It's crazy. Sometimes I'll go back of like, you know, chapter that I wrote like 2 months ago and be like, wait, like, or something that just kind of like came out in like a random writing dump, like actually makes sense, or they do definitely have a mind of their own. And I think that's a very you know, good point and a good thing, I think, to remind yourself and anyone that like you might have a concept that seems really great where there's like a title or two characters or even just like a really cool arc, but that might not mean it's like a full-fledged story or a full-fledged series or anything like that. And that was kind of the struggle. I remember I was watching, I think it was Devney Perry, her Instagram story, and she was saying like, how many times do you rewrite a book? And I was kind of, it was before I published, and I was like, wait, I feel like I didn't really rewrite this book. You know, I had a first draft and I obviously edited it, but it wasn't that much different than kind of the first iteration of it. And then I realized, I was like, wait, no, this is actually like the seventh iteration. And we can get into it a little bit more in terms of the inspiration, but I hadn't originally planned them to be the first book. Like I said, I think there's 45 to 50,000 words somewhere with their names, but a completely different storyline. So it is, you know, it's a 6th, 7th iteration, not necessarily a full-fledged draft, but it is like it will change, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes like, because we're so, I guess, heavily conditioned to think that if it's not if we don't do it right the first time, or if we don't do it the first time, or whatever the case may be, that it's somehow not allowed to adapt or change or evolve.
Yes.
And books are such a unique genre, I think, of media, like, or creativity or art, you know, that like over the course of 100,000 words, like shit's going to evolve.
100%. And I think it is so unique where like you're not, it can be, it's very flexible, where I think, you know, sometimes with like movies or TV, you feel like you need to get into this kind of like rigid structure where it has to be 3 acts or whatever. And that's definitely something to keep in mind. But even with, I think, and it was a learning lesson for me, because one of the early ARC readers that I had told me, she was like, I loved your book, but like the plot didn't finish. I'm really confused. And it kind of reminded me that I was like, wait, the way that I'm kind of doing it, where it's each book, it's a trilogy, is a complete love story, but the plot continues. That needs to be kind of like explicitly said. Also, huge nod to Jessie Mihalik. She writes this amazing series called Hunt the Stars, and there was one before that called Polaris Rising, and it's kind of like a space fantasy. Awesome. And she's where I drew a lot of inspiration from in terms of that kind of structure, where she has those individual love stories with the threads of plot that carry through. So huge nod to her.
Yeah, and that's personally like what I love writing as well, that with my Nocturnal Hearts series, that's how it kind of runs as well, that it's like this bigger overarching world and events and things that are going on, but each book has its own self-contained love story, its own wrap up moment essentially for those characters, and they will pop up in other places, but yeah, it's not sort of an ongoing storyline for them. Their cameos, but yeah, as you say, there's certainly obviously seeds that get sown within your book for future events that are coming up.
Future characters.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I love as well, is any book or, you know, series that has that kind of energy where you're meeting characters.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm such a sucker for it, especially when there's like, you get it, it's very specific, but anything that's either like second chance or enemies to lovers, and you see them kind of like argue, or like little drops of that they're going to be like the second or third book. I'm like, I need it now. I can't have it.
Yeah.
I love the connected standalones. So
well,
yeah,
it's that you know, the broody character, particularly like our broody male main characters, who are the very like, I'm an island, I need no one. I you know, and
don't
we
talk
just know
someone's going to be talking to you very soon. I'm talking the next book, honey. It's like, don't you say that. That's so funny. Yeah, because it is, and I think it has a good, another, on the flip side of that, I always like love bonus epilogues and kind of like being able to see a couple happy, especially with, I think, you know, any romance book, but also specifically I feel like fantasy or paranormal, like you have pretty high stakes element of plot that have to get wrapped up kind of at the end of the book, and half the time that deals with, you know, either the couple like getting back together, or just like they seem to be only having like one chapter of actual happiness
Yeah.
at the end. So it is nice to kind of you know, see them happy. Like it's I won't ruin it, but there's a nice little Dominic and Rose scene in the second book
Yeah.
where you can like really see how they're, I think, from an outside perspective, how their relationship looks
Yeah. Like
months or a couple weeks back.
we get the chance to actually see them kind of being, you know, for want of a better word, like the domestic side of them.
Yes,
You're so right that fantasy and paranormal, particularly, you know, we might get glimpses of them in a kind of state of things have resolved between them or whatever, but then so often there are either external elements or something's going on, or there's a battle, or there's someone needs to be saved, and we don't get that kind of moment of actually just enjoying them being together. So yeah, it's like you're serving it up beautifully on a platter for everyone to like come and enjoy this part.
I mean, that's, I feel like one of the better parts is obviously the kind of like the angst and the slow burn, or, you know, the buildup is so great, but it's also nice to see them kind of like get on the other side. And I'm sure you feel the same way, but also when you're writing it, you're like, wait, I want them to be happy. Like I put them through so much. Or like, you know, I cried like a baby writing the, it was editing the, you said you finished, just so I don't spoil anything.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, I will not spoil it. Something gets revealed towards the end of the book, and when I was going back through editing it, I didn't like realize how kind of like, oh, ow, that hurts it was, until I like read it for the second time, and then I just started crying. I was like, wait, no, I just want them to be happy. Like I can't.
Yeah. Why did I do this?
Why did I choose to do this? But that's part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is such a part that I love about indie romance particularly, is that we get this creative freedom to offer the side stories or bonus scenes. Like we can, the sky is the limit really for what you want to create or what your creativity desires to pull together. And I really, that's one of the parts I love, because if we think about any of our, you know, beloved books or whatever, like you mentioned Percy Jackson, like right at the start, you know, can you imagine if like in that era of, you know, growing up reading those books or whatever the case may be, if there was the opportunity to have like the bonus material or all the things that we kind of want but are never able to have with traditional publishing.
Because there is that barrier where it's like Rick Riordan can't just drop, or he's releasing another book, but I know he's going to put Percy Jackson through the absolute ringer again. But yeah, you're so right, where you can really give people what they, or yourself and people, what they want in terms of that, you know, extra content that's not, like you said, in traditional publishing.
Yeah, and is also something that, like you mentioned before, with something like Netflix, for example, you know, we can binge a series or whatever it is that we're into, but we're never going to get the ability to have all that extra just like goodness that we want to see for the characters, because it's just the physical impossibility of recording that. And so in indie like self-publishing, we have such a unique opportunity that as long as your creative kind of flow can keep up with it or can deliver it, or, you know, because obviously some people are faster writers than others, and some people have, well, many people have other things that require of their time. So time is really like the biggest factor, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But that's such a good point, where it's like, no matter how successful a series is, like you're not really going to get that kind of like the little like holiday chapter from them where they're just like the best, thick and happy, and it's just something that you'd love to have, but that's never going to happen, or it could for TV. But it's just so much easier, where if you get this spark of inspiration and you like, you can just send it out on a newsletter, and it's just like, oh, here's one more chapter. And like that, I think, is such a special thing, because it also kind of like keeps people involved and allows yourself to go back to characters that you love, especially when you have, you know, a series that you're in like the fifth iteration of or you know, the fifth book. You miss the characters that you wrote in the first book, type of thing.
Yeah, and it's so fun being able to play with that. And you know, anything like Patreon and stuff, like I just love how it really is like your creative brain can just play with it and have fun with it and explore it. And we'll touch on things like character art in just a moment, because that's something that your world is delivering in spades. Like so we have to talk about For the Love of the Gods, because this is book one in your trilogy, and this is Dominic and Rose's story, or as we also meet them in the book, Lady Hades and Lord Pluto. Is it Lord?
Lord
Pluto. And we have a marriage of convenience. We have enemies to lovers. We have all the good stuff coming in. And we have a beautiful opening scene of literally the moment that we have our enemies to lovers at peak enemies of basically who is going to stab who first.
That is a great way to put it. Who's getting stabbed?
Who's getting stabbed first? And it is such a great kind of moment of reveal of their past that they have had of knowing one another, you know, and then moving very quickly into essentially, as we so often know from indie romance tropes, that the enemies to lovers is often just the physical manifestation of very intense emotional states.
Oh yeah, big time.
So because we have Dominic's point of view as we come into the story, right? So we're essentially seeing Dominic come in with the intention to be a little bit murderous. Just a little bit murderous.
One little midnight murder.
Yeah. And to extract his revenge for essentially what he has been planning around the death of his friend at what is considered to be the hands of Rose, our female main character. And we have this beautiful moment where essentially Dominic goes, oh, you know what would be a better idea than murder? Marriage.
Smart man. So smart. He's hilarious.
It sets it up so wonderfully. So we have to go there with like, how did this trilogy come about for you? Like, obviously Dominic and Rose were kind of names that came up for you in previous work, but then we have this very unique world and storyline evolve. So tell us all about like where For the Love of the Gods came from for you and the trilogy, because I'm just fascinated to know. It is such a cool world.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be also huge spoiler warning because I can't stop myself. I will be.
It's like if you haven't read For the Love of the Gods, like press pause, go get it, like get in there, and then
come back. But yeah, actually, Dominic and Rose were kind of names I was attached to, and specifically the idea. I think this is where I get into it, where, like you said, Dominic's trying to extract revenge for the murder of his best friend, or what he thinks is the murder, at the hands of Rose, who also it happens to be his best friend and Rose's brother and her older brother. And so he decides that, you know, it's better to do, extract slow revenge through the course of their marriage because it just makes sense. And he does literal mental gymnastics trying to make it make sense, but it works. But actually the first character I thought of kind of in this series, and to paint a little bit of a backstory, it's basically like a modern world where there's both the Roman and the Greek gods and all their counterparts existing. And like I said, I was a huge Percy Jackson fan, so I'd always been so kind of like invested in that world. And I honestly, at this point, don't even remember where the first inspiration came from, but I was just kind of like, oh, it'd be cool if it meshed together. And the first character I thought of was actually Adrian, where he's kind of his backstory is that his mother was the Greek version of Zeus and his father was the Roman version, which is Jupiter. and they had this kind of like crazy forbidden love story, which I'm debating writing a prequel for them, but it would probably be a short story if I ever did. But they kind of had this um forbidden type romance, and all of a sudden Adrian pops out and everyone's like, wait, hold on, he's now the person that's going to mesh these two worlds together, because what is everyone going to do? Like, now these two kind of like godly systems that have existed for so long, like thousands of years, now have this person who has to bring them together. What the hell? And it's kind of this whole thing where it started, all everyone freaked out. It started all these power dynamics. Obviously, Dominic and Rose are two versions of Hades, because I think the Greek system is a little bit more well known. But yeah, Dominic's basically the Roman version. And the first character was Adrian. I was like, wow, that would be so interesting. And at first, I was going to write his book first. His love interest has stayed the same. You meet her in book 2. There's a little hint in book 1, but it's very, very, very in the weeds. But yeah, I was going to initially write their story, and kind of the first inspiration I had for them is this whole scene where he brings his love interest basically to like a party with all of the gods, and she's like kind of freaking out because she's very well known in society, but she's like, I can't like be around all of these gods, I'm gonna freak out. And Rose comes up to her and is being like really sweet and really like just kind of kind, as is her natural inclination. But then all of a sudden she like drops this mask, and Dominic walks up and they start like immediately fighting with one another. And I just like couldn't get rid. It was like, that was the first scene I wrote, and I just like couldn't get rid of their kind of like dynamic of, they just like automatically so didn't like each other, but there was also something kind of like under the radar there for them. And then I decided that it also made more sense that Adrian would be the last book in the series, because everything kind of like started with him, it's going to end with him. So then yeah, I was kind of like, I couldn't give up Dominic and Rose, started their kind of writing their story a little bit, and then it just all, as I'm sure you know, it kind of does when you land on a good idea, like all seemed to fall into place really quickly after that. And then I don't remember when in the writing process I wrote the first scene, but I thought it was very interesting to have it from Dominic's perspective, especially because a big kind of like plot point is that Rose has created this kind of image of herself to protect herself, because she like had a very, you know, tragic thing happen to her and her brother, and everyone just assumed she was the one to do it, which she was kind of. But the story is that their father,
read the book to find out the details.
Long story short, you know, their father was a very like power hungry man who just wanted them to just be these kind of like killers. He orchestrated a situation where Rose accidentally killed her brother, but everyone in kind of the power struggle resulting from Adrian's birth, and she was young, everyone just assumed that she killed him, and she was like, wait, what did I do to make anybody think that I was capable of this? And that started this kind of like obsession with her being this like kind of very much like a Hades stereotype of this like murderous, like evil bitch, for lack of a better term. And so I thought that that was interesting to kind of have it start out with the perspective of, you know, someone who hates her as much as the rest of the world seems to, and then for it to very quickly flip into just like her I think perspective and how she thinks. But yes, very long-winded answer. That's how I came up with it.
No, I love it because it is very intricate. Like there's a lot going on in the world and the layers of the world. But I think you write it really beautifully in that it's, sometimes you get fantasy books where there's necessarily a lot of world building that has to happen. And it feels like a lot of information all at once. Whereas I think with your book, because it's very character driven, we see everything through the eyes of the character, and we get to hear about it in that way. And it feels like we're kind of drawn into this world of, as you say, it's like modern society, but also we're in the world of the gods, right? Like we're in their world. We kind of have these elements of magic, their power, we're seeing, as you say, like the two kind of systems trying to mesh together, but still struggling with the fact that, you know, ultimately, unless people are prepared to share power, that's a big thing as well. And I guess that's quite a key thing to Dominic and Rose's arranged marriage and storyline, isn't it? That they are essentially merging two households, like two household names, which is the Hades name and the Pluto line. And so we have characters, and I really love this, like how we have characters referenced by kind of their formal god name, or just their kind of like regular name, right? So it's like we've got, you know, for a character like Rose being known as Rose throughout the book, but then in certain contexts she's Lady Hades, or as she then becomes is Lady Pluto with her married name.
She was trying to get rid of that name so fast.
Yeah, because like you say, with that influence then of like, it's almost like she was tarnished with her father's image, right? So once she kind of had that escape hatch of, oh, well, actually, if I jump into this arranged marriage, even though I fucking hate you,
and I can get rid of it, you know.
I can get rid of that.
For sure.
Yeah, and we have then the kind of magical element comes in of quite literally their worlds combine, and that was such a fun, like, that must have been such a fun thing to write in many ways.
It was a lot of fun, and it was one of those that kind of like, I just thought it was cute, and I didn't realize how many people would like actually think that that was very interesting, which we'll get into another one where there's a scene that I just very offhandedly wrote that has been apparently like the most well-received scene. It was because that's part of it where I'm, you know, very lucky for my first, you know, book to have had an art team who was very, 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 you know, supportive. And one creator in particular, her name's maybe Maya Reeds, made a TikTok, and it you know, it did fairly well, and that established a good chunk of my like, you know, albeit indie and small, but you know, readership. And so I'm very thankful to her. And it was that scene that she like made a TikTok about. But anyways, getting distracted. Well, oh, the houses merging. That was the whole thing. Basically, their kind of houses merge, and I thought that that was a very like, it was just like a fun thing to have their like styles combine. And I think it was fun. There was a couple moments where I wanted to write like how similar they actually were, and this whole kind of like forced hatred of each other through a misunderstanding ultimately, you know, was kind of undermined by how similar they actually were, where their styles are different. Like Dominic's all like broody and dark and has like a bunch of like dark wood in his house, and Rose is like full of color and whatever, but they have basically the same exact like layout of their rooms, and they both, you know, love to read and all this stuff. And I thought that was just like so much fun. And then that's also a scene where you get the first kind of like inclination that Dominic might be a little bit at least protective over her, because it's his right to torture her, not anybody else.
Yeah. Like if you're gonna suffer, it's gonna be at my hands, no one else's.
No one else. And yeah, so that was a little, it was like when she finally was just like having a little nerd moment. He's like, oh my God, why are you freaking out? It was fun. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, it's nice to kind of write those more like low stakes scenes that don't always have to be as dramatic, because it can be just like very comfy.
Yeah. And I loved like we got to see so much of their kind of characters coming through as well, because as you say, like Dominic's this very broody, reserved, you know, he's Lord of the Underworld, right? Like, so he's, you know, he's got that kind of presence about him that is very probably like threatening to a lot of people, but Rose like meets him like pound for pound in terms of like I ain't gonna back down. Yeah, like you don't scare me, tough guy, like I'll give as good as I get. And then we have that moment where she's kind of like sees there's like the physical joining of all their possessions. Essentially he's got his library, and we see this very like bristly moment of like, don't fucking touch my books, like do not touch my bookcase.
And
she's like, oh, a weakness.
Oh my God, something of his I can mess up? Crazy. Yeah. And there's the like Dominic's appearance was very much based off of Charlie Hunnam. And there's a specific scene in a movie called The Gentleman, where
Oh,
Hugh
I
Grant's
love that
character,
movie. I love
I
that
love
movie
that
so
movie.
much.
Okay, so you're gonna know what I'm talking about. There's a
Yeah.
scene where Hugh Grant's in his house and is touching his whiskey, and he
Yeah.
keeps like, he is jumping out of his chair. That's exactly what the scene where he's like going to touch his books is based on, of him being like, "Are you for real? Like,
Yeah.
do you really want to try this right now?"
Yeah.
I'm so glad you know that.
Yeah.
I love that movie so much. But that's exactly what it was, kind of that like, okay, let's go. And
Yeah.
she doesn't let him, because I thought it was interesting for her as a character, what I was trying to do, I don't know how effective it was that I thought it was interesting that she was really like, she chose to be very kind. Like, she wasn't a pushover by any means, but her moments of kindness were very much like a choice for her, or when she was forgiving, or, was not fighting Dominic like a banshee. It was like very much kind of like a strong kindness rather than kind of like a pushover. Not that that's, necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, I think that was what I tried to do. And also with her messing with Dominic's stuff, that it was just kind of like, if he actually really was hurt by it, she wouldn't do it because that's not her nature. But it was just so fun to like
Yeah.
tease him and get after him as much as she could.
Yeah, and it's like you could tell that she just kind of knew that she could needle him a little bit and see some of that emotion that obviously is there, but he's very good at pretending is not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Until he absolutely cannot anymore. It's so much fun.
Yeah, and that's something that really comes through beautifully in like as their marriage of convenience progresses into, oh shit, what are these feelings in my chest?
Yeah. I feel weird around this person. How crazy.
Yeah. What is this funny feeling? Am I dying? Is there something wrong with me?
No, that's definitely it was kind of, that was the vibe where it was like, wait, that's weird. Or like, I feel a little funny around you. That's so crazy.
Yeah. Why did I just go and like buy you this thing that you cared about? And
oh, the big jam. Oh, the big jam. That was like, yeah, it was sweet because it was like his natural inclination is not to be an asshole. It was just kind of like he's more brooding or quiet. And he also had, a very traumatic thing happen to him that was a direct result of the power struggle. And what Rose did to her brother, in his mind, is exactly the same thing. And so it's kind of seeing him like walk back, oh wait, I actually really don't know, these aren't the same thing at all. Like what I thought this was, and the level of kind of like assholery that this warranted is not the same thing at all. And kind of started with him being like very like, no, you can't, the one shop woman being like rude to her, he's like, you don't get to do that. Like that's and then goes back and is like, this is for my wife, thank you very much.
Yeah, because we have this kind of world where they go to purgatory, which is like the town essentially, that their underworld that they control, and everyone hates Rose, like, and it is that thing, like you say, that it is that moment of Dominic realizing like, oh shit, if there's anybody that's going to be hating on my wife that I have married for revenge, I am the one, not any of you people.
And it kind of has a moment too where he's like, wait, because it's something I think everyone like goes through life sometimes and doesn't realize the weight of their actions. And I think Dominic and Rose, one of the things that makes their situation special, which is actually kind of expounded upon in the second book a little bit more, so the underworld is very insulated. Like as much as they have like impact on other people, like they kind of live in their own world a little bit. And Dominic's around here not even caring who knows how much he dislikes Rose or, hates her. And he has this moment where he's like, wait, people are doing this because they think that I'm like giving them permission to.
Yeah,
or
like that I've approved that everyone should behave this way. Yeah.
When he realizes that a little bit later in the book as well, he's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, like what have I done?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
And you're so right. Like if we can touch on that for a moment, that's a big part of the world that you're building in this trilogy, is that we've got the underworld and then we have what's known as the upper world. And I would love if you can kind of explain that for listeners who maybe haven't read the book and in preparation of go fucking read the book.
Reading the book.
Yeah. Because it's a very cool concept. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did. It's basically kind of, the standard thing in Greek mythology where, you have Hades, who's the underworld, you have Poseidon, who rules the seas, and then you have Zeus, who kind of rules the entire world above. And I kind of it kind of came from necessity a little bit, where I couldn't just keep saying, oh, they're going above ground, or like, they're, basically that over and over again. I just couldn't keep repeating that phrase. And so I was like, I need what's the opposite of the underworld, the upper world. And that's kind of also, you get into like, that's Adrian's whole domain as well, where that's his whole kind of like, and with each book also it escalates where, the next book is going to be about Lucas, who's the Poseidon heir. We love our sea boys.
Yeah. And he appears like freshly like dripping wet out of the ocean in a couple of scenes where you're kind of going like, holy shit, this is going to be so fucking hot when it gets to his book. Like,
it's gonna be great. And so he's kind of the season. That's a small ramp up where his court is much bigger, and it deals like you have humans like running around all the time, and like families who's been a part of kind of that like sea god space for so long. And because you don't really have any humans who live in the underworld other than the few that go to purgatory, and kind of that small ramp up. And then when you get to Adrian's book, he's dealing with the whole fucking kit and caboodle at that point, and kind of seeing how that changes their motivations or how much they affect people. That's another thing kind of about Adrian, is he's so like obsessed with kind of like control, or his image has to be so like, when you first meet him, I think Dominic describes him as like always being in a perfectly pressed suit, because he has to just be such like this perfect figurehead, because one, his birth almost destroyed the planet, and two, like he is so aware of how he's perceived as this kind of like king of the gods figure. But yes, to your point, is I thought it was I needed a word for them going above ground, or like that scene where they have dinner at a restaurant by the beach. Like I needed a term for it. So that's kind of, and then it ended up working out well, like we were saying. You have little things that you write, and then you're like, oh wait, that actually works great. And then it kind of continues on.
Yeah, and I really love those little touches of moments when, as you say, like in Dominic and Rose's case, they're residing in the underworld, like that's their domain, that's where they rule, but they have, humans essentially living in the upper world who are, loyal to them, essentially, like, or have been loyal to their houses. And as you say, the merging of power and things like that is a big thing that comes into Rose's storyline particularly, that we won't spoiler for anyone reading, but it is quite a crucial thing of those moments of essentially going to the upper world to see what's going on with humans, like the humans that have been praying to them, or loyal to them, or have sworn like allegiance to them, or whatever we want to call it, right? That we've got these these very like real life moments, and they kind of they have this cute moment of like going essentially on a date to the upper world and going out for dinner.
And that I thought that I loved that moment. I thought it was cute. And you're 100% right, where it's kind of like religious in a certain respect, where it's these people who've these gods that their whole life, when their family members pass away, they're like, I like Hades watch over my loved one. And then all of a sudden you don't really have that anymore, because that moniker is kind of it's merged, it hasn't gone away, but it's now walking around under a different name, and how that could really disrupt an everyday person's life.
And how people choose to react to change, I think, is like a really big theme, right? That it's like, are people willing to embrace it, or are they willing to just be set in their ways, or have their opinions, or their stereotypical views, or whatever? Like, so I thought that was really like cleverly woven in with a lot of that, because again, like writing political sort of issues into fantasy worlds can be very challenging.
Yeah.
to do it in a way that is easy to connect to and doesn't sort of lose the reader in the sort of the machinations of the world. So yeah, I think we certainly still see a lot of the very easily relatable kind of level of it comes through really well. Yeah.
Glad.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So like you mentioned before about a particular scene that was picked up by one of your art readers.
Yeah.
Should we talk about that for a hot moment?
Talk about that for a hot moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one where, and I think it's interesting. I'm sure you probably feel the same way, where you kind of write something and you're like, that's cute, but you don't expect that to kind of be like a selling point, or like on TikTok where there's those scenes that like everyone says, I saw one line from a book and now I read it type of thing.
Yeah.
And there was, it was kind of a theme because, to speak frankly, part of their enemies to lovers arc is I start, there's like a hate sex interlude, basically. Yeah. And part of where in their minds, like they keep it very separate, where it's like, no, we don't like each other actually, is that they don't sleep in the same bed, that their rooms are kind of, connected by this joint bathroom, very a la like his and her things. But that, they never really sleep in the same bed except for these like super isolated circumstances where they're locked in overnight, or, Dominic's, having a moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's this one scene where they kind of get in a fight, which because I hate third act breakups. I think that they're, necessary. That's too strong of a word. I love them when they're like, and I think there's so many ways that they're done well and seem important, but I think there's times where it doesn't necessarily have to happen. And I was like, I didn't feel like it needed to happen in this book, but there needed to be some type of kind of like, this is not just all sunshine and rainbows. Like they actually didn't like each other at a certain point in time, and seeing how them as like an actual couple would fight, or like if they'd have disagreements. But there was a scene where all of kind of Rose's hiding of the public's reaction to her, of how kind of cruel, for lack of a better word, people have been to her over the years, kind of comes to a head, and Dominic freaks out because he's like, you should have told me like all this stuff. And she's like, I couldn't have told you. You wanted them to do this, and like all this stuff. And they basically kind of get in a fight. They have to part ways. And that night, Rose is like, I don't think I can like stay in his room. Like, I just don't think we're there where or she was like, I hope we are, but I think I just have to like go to my own room. And
he's not there, right? Like, so she's kind of having to make a judgment call of like, her inner monologue is like, do I just go and hop into bed, and what the fuck's going to be his reaction when he comes back? Or do I just play it safe, go to my own room? Like, even though I haven't been there for a while.
And their house is literally like, you don't live here anymore. This is now a sitting room.
Yeah.
And it's like getting smaller, but she like gets in bed and is just like, because the worst thing would be that she gets in bed in his bed and he's like, what the fuck are you doing here?
Yeah.
So she, gets in bed and he wakes her up like an hour later. He's like, what the fuck? Like, absolutely not. And he's like, what the hell? You sleep in my bed now. What, like, literally, I think he says, yeah, absolutely not. And what else is it? Oh, it's, I've gotten used to you sleeping in my bed. Don't take that away from me. And that was the little, thank you. That was the little scene where, like I said, an amazing creator, her handle's maybe Maya Reed's, like made a TikTok about it, and it did fairly well. And it was just, and then someone else I'd like reposted it, was like, no, that was like one of my favorite scenes. I was like, great. Like, it was, because it just, to me, it was like, I think it was maybe a total of like 700 words. Like, it just seemed so short, but I think it was a pivotal point ultimately in their relationship of like, no, we're actually in a relationship. This is not just like a physical thing that is born out of, I think, like proximity and ease.
Yeah. And you're so right that it like also was a real, as we know, we love when we have these broody male main characters, like the crack of vulnerability that comes through. And that was probably like the real we had his own like moments of admission like leading up to that, but that was the real kind of like catalyst moment when he like actually admits to her that there be feelings floating around in this chest of mine.
Not just that. Yeah, so that was it was great to see that, and it was a nice surprise too, because there was certain other scenes that I was like more, I think, hit tropes that I really love as a reader, and that was definitely one of them. But it was a nice surprise.
Yeah, and it's like a nice little quiet moment that, as you say, like when we're writing like a full novel and going on this big journey, it's really interesting to see what leaps off the page for people and really captures the imagination. And you're so right that it is so often these just like one line moments that we don't expect is going to be the thing that really like grabs for people and grabs for readers. Yeah,
I know, I'm happy. Like, it's by no means a negative. It's great.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, we have to touch on just quickly where we're going next, which is The Gods Only Know, which is, at the time that we're recording this, we're still a few months away from that coming out, I believe.
And August 28th, so 2 months almost.
Yeah, delicious. And that's going to be Lucas, who we meet in book 1, and Daphne, who is MIA for the duration of book 1.
Book 1. A little context is Daphne is Rose's best friend. She's also a god. You don't know what her heritage is until like the last line of the epilogue. And I think, you know, fans of Greek mythology and specifically Percy Jackson will know the inspiration. But they're basically, Lucas throughout this whole thing, you know, Lucas, Adrian, and Dominic are all very close because they're like, you know, the 3 most important gods. And Rose's older brother, who also at one point was supposed to be, you know, the next Hades until he, you know, sadly died. They were all really close friends throughout the whole story. Lucas has this kind of like very interesting friendship with Rose, where, you know, they're the only, like basically the only 2 people who can fight each other without, you know, absolutely pummeling the other person, like can channel, so that you see Lucas in these moments where he's just like clearly not paying attention, or like he's just really under this mask. And there's been allusions to the fact that his fiance, who they had an arranged marriage since when they were children, Daphne, has been missing basically for the better part of a year, and missing on her own. Like, not, she wasn't taken. She's been gone on her own choice.
Chose to disappear.
And he's obviously dealing with it. Rose has kind of a moment where Daphne's supposed to be her best friend, so she's like, Jesus Christ, where is she? Type of thing. But you come to find out in the epilogue that Daphne is actually from the Athena house. And historically, Poseidon and Athena do not like each other. And so their whole arrangement was to really kind of like dispel those historic, like really historic, like we don't like each other type of thing. And they're have very much like a second chance, childhood friends. I think to enemies, to lovers, there's a moment there, but it's been really, I think, I was thinking about it earlier, and what's been really cool with their book to write, and I'm in the editing stage now, I'm done, thank God. But what's been really cool with their book to write is kind of with Dominic and Rose, it was like these moments where they discover that they actually get along, or they have a lot in common, or that they think similarly. But with Lucas and Daphne, they knew that. And it's kind of getting back to a reminder that they used to think the same way, or moments where they miss how close they used to be, because they were best friends type of thing until something happened. And just kind of like seeing that interaction. And also you meet her in book 1, but the Roman version of Athena, who's Minerva, she's like fully alive and well, is parading around, being great. And so she is kind of, she has an element there where it's, you know, Daphne's not taking over as Athena, she's marrying into the Poseidon line, and seeing how that dynamic works. But yeah, I'm very excited for their book. There's a couple scenes that I have really enjoyed really enjoyed writing. But yeah, I mean, it's even just so great to talk about it. Like we were saying kind of before we started, that you do get these moments where you do get to talk about why you kind of like nerd out on your own like storylines and stuff like that. So I'm very excited. It comes out August 28th.
Oh, I love it. And it's going to be so good because we're going to be, I'm assuming, spending a lot of time in Poseidon's world.
Oh
And
yes.
yeah, I like, yeah, it's always delicious when we get to have that kind of like underwater, like anything that kind of like dabbles in that sort of realm, I think is really fascinating to me. I'm a Pisces, so I'm like
Oh, amazing.
automatically, yeah,
And
whenever
the
there's
love,
anything like watery
and
involved,
it's
I'm
been
like,
that's been
yeah.
really fun doing kind of little like how the palace looks, and how you have that kind of like underwater but not underwater at certain points thing. And they have like there's like hippocampi, which are like basically underwater horses like running around, and that's been really great. And then yeah, I'm trying to think. Adrian's book will probably come out at the end of the year, if not beginning. He's You learn a little bit more about him. He's great. There's also I just did the fan art for Rose and Dominic, uh, which was great. I kept it a real secret that
Yeah.
Dominic was blonde, apparently. um, Dominic is blonde, warning everybody.
Yeah. Dominic's repping the blonde mermaid characters that
Yes, he
we
is.
love. Yeah.
That we love, and it's a best kept secret. But uh, oh yes, fan art for Lucas, Daphne, and Adrian is coming. I'm keeping Adrian's love interest a secret until you meet her. But yeah, it's been fun. Kind of like you said, it's nice getting little. I didn't really have that many like Lucas and Daphne interactions because Daphne's been MIA. Where to kind of see the interactions or lack thereof between Adrian and his love interest have also been very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun how we get to meet them individually and we get to see them
Yeah.
kind of hanging out in that context of like being Dominic's friends essentially.
Mhm.
But we get the little like teasers of we know that we're going on a journey with them as well. And we just have to quickly nod to the fact that again we have a really fun couple of moments in book one where Lucas and Rose's friendship that has been, a long time friendship. And as you say, like sparring partners and just sort of
Mhm.
having that dynamic of both missing, Daphne
Mhm.
essentially,
Yeah.
that basically Rose uses it as an opportunity to wind Dominic the fuck up by not
Oh,
telling
it's
him.
so fun. I
Yeah,
know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, by not telling him that when Lucas comes knocking at like midnight looking for her, that they're actually going off to like, yeah, they're actually going off to like beat the shit out of each other. And she leaves it very ambiguous that
That what's happening, and just to be a little, and I think it's great because that's another thing where it's like Dominic's a little bit of an ass at the beginning of the book, but Rose is punch for punch with him, where she's like, okay, I'll let you think that me and your best friend have something going on, that's fine.
yeah.
In reality, it's like very much like a brother-sister relationship where Lucas half the time is like, you need to talk to like Dominic, don't get me involved, like all this stuff. Oh, the scene after the beach where Lucas comes knocking for Rose again and is like traumatized because one of his generals, who happens to be a dolphin, saw Rose and Dominic getting it on a little bit.
Getting it on in the water.
In the water, a little bit.
Yeah. And I think I love like in that moment when he's like, dude, like, two gods fucking going at it, like in the ocean, like.
And you like, what did you expect was gonna happen? He's like,
it's a bit of a power surge going on up there, guys.
Thank you very much. Where they're just like, what? Me? Never. And he's like, that would never happen. Where he's, what does he say? Like, the two gods of the underworld just like stepping into my territory. You wouldn't think that I'd know. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so funny. And I hope that little moments like that make other people laugh, because they make me laugh.
Yeah, and it's what I always like. For me, I personally love when we've got, we can bring in these elements of the humor, as well as the fantasy, as well as the gods and goddesses and things. It's just like this perfect fucking combination of things. So I know I am very excited for the next 2 books to come out. So it is going to be so fun to carry on this journey. So while I absolutely could keep you here all day pestering you about your books and characters and things, please let everyone know, where can they come and be part of your world? How can they get in touch with you? Where can they find your books? Give us all the goods.
All the goods. We'll do like the hot ones, like tell us 5 minutes about, or like your look at the camera and tell us about yourself type of thing. You can find me on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, that I don't use, but I have a handle, at author Rory L. Scott. My books are available on Kindle Unlimited, as well as paperback. And then, I'm most active on Instagram and TikTok. I have a newsletter. That's where you can see kind of things first, like fan art. Like I said, Rose and Dominic already posted, but Lucas, Daphne, and Adrian are on their way. And those are, everything is author Rory L. Scott.
Lovely. And it is an absolute delight to be part of that world with, as you say, seeing the characters come to life, seeing the artwork coming out. It's just so good. And I feel so blessed to be able to have had you come and to hang out with us and talk all the things. We just know we're going to have to come back and talk more about 100%. This world and these characters. It's like we're locked in for the journey with the
also
gods.
Like I said, to talk about, I went to the Taylor Swift School of Easter Eggs. I love my Easter eggs.
Yeah, and I know that probably like your readership will be on the same page, on the same wavelength.
We can go back and talk about all the little things I threw in there.
Yeah, because I think, as you say, like there was a lot that I know I will very much appreciate, like moving forward, that it's kind of like just those little things that you probably won't realize until later, and then you go, wait a minute.
Excuse me, you've been telling me since when?
Like hang on, like furiously like going back through like
and that's what I do, so it's what I hope other people can do.
And that is like the most delicious part, especially with it being a trilogy, that we get to have these things come up throughout. So I have to say, biggest thank you ever. Thank you so much for coming on. Remember, everyone, that you can follow along with us at successful.witches, and you can find me at Elliot Rose Author in all the places. It was an absolute pleasure having you here with us. Thank you so much, Rory, and we will see you all on the next episode.